Malik Thompson's hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles taut as the red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror, a siren slicing through the quiet night. He was a young black lawyer, dressed in a crisp suit, but to the cop striding toward his car, he was already a suspect, another name to be processed, another life to be upended. The highway was deserted, the asphalt shimmering under the sodium glow of streetlights. Malik, 27, had been driving home from a late night at the Justice Department, his briefcase stuffed with case files on his passenger seat. He'd been meticulous, speed within the limit, hands at 10 and 2, no sudden moves. Yet here he was, pulled over, the weight of the moment pressing against his chest. He took a slow breath, his law school training kicking in. Stay calm. Be polite. Don't give them a reason. But his pulse raced, betraying the fear he'd learned to bury. The officer, a broad-shouldered man with a buzz cut and a badge that read Officer Daniels, tapped on the window with his flashlight. Malik lowered it, the cool night air rushing in. "Evening, officer," he said, his voice steady, practiced. "Is there a problem?" Daniels's eyes narrowed, scanning Malik's suit, the car, the briefcase. "License and registration," he barked, his tone laced with suspicion. Malik moved slowly, reaching for his wallet, but Daniels's hand shot to his holster. "Slow down, kid. Don't try anything funny." Malik froze, his heart pounding. "I'm just getting my ID, sir." He handed over the documents, his hands steady despite the tremor in his gut. Daniels snatched them, stepping back to his cruiser, muttering into his radio. Malik caught the words suspicious and male. He clenched his jaw, staring straight ahead, the siren's wail still echoing in his ears. This isn't new, he thought, but it never gets easier. Minutes later, Daniels returned with another officer, a wiry man with a sneer that matched his partner's. "Step out of the vehicle," Daniels ordered. Malik's stomach dropped. "Why, officer? I wasn't speeding. Out now?" The second officer, badge reading Carter, opened the door, his hand hovering over his gun. Malik complied, his polished shoes hitting the gravel, his suit jacket catching the breeze. The officers circled him, their flashlights blinding. "Hands on the hood!" Daniels snapped. Malik obeyed, the metal cold against his palms. Carter began searching the car, tossing Malik's briefcase onto the ground, papers spilling out. "Fancy car, fancy suit," Carter said, smirking. What's a guy like you doing out here? Selling something you shouldn't?" Malik's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. "I'm a lawyer. I work for the Justice Department. Those are case files." Daniels laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Justice Department?" "Sure, kid. And I'm the governor." He stepped closer, his breath sour. "We know your type. Good talkers, bad business. What's in the trunk? Drugs? Cash?" "I'm not a criminal," Malik said, his voice low but firm. "You have no cause for this." "No cause?" Carter yanked Malik's arm, twisting it behind his back. "You're out here, driving a car like this, looking like you do. That's cause enough." Malik winced but didn't resist, his mind racing. He'd read the case law, written briefs on profiling, but now he was living it, the system's weight crushing him. Daniels shoved him against the car. "One call," Malik said, his voice steady despite the pain. "Let me make one call." The officers exchanged a glance, then Carter shrugged. "Fine. Make it quick. And no funny business." Malik pulled out his phone, his fingers steady as he dialed. The line rang once, twice, then a deep, familiar voice answered. "Dad," Malik said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need you." 15 minutes later, the precinct was a hive of chaos. Malik sat in a holding room, his wrists sore from the cuffs they'd slapped on him, his suit rumpled but his posture unyielding. The officers had dragged him here, ignoring his protests, convinced they'd nabbed a dealer masquerading as a lawyer. The room smelled of stale coffee and sweat, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Malik stared at the wall, his mind replaying every case he'd studied, every story of injustice he'd sworn to fight. This is it, he thought. This is what they go through. The door slammed open, and a man stormed in, tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair and a presence that filled the room. Attorney General James Thompson, Malik's father, his face a mask of controlled fury. The officers behind him froze, their bravado evaporating. "You," James said, pointing at Daniels, his voice like thunder. "You just derailed a federal sting operation. This young man is my son, a lawyer with the Justice Department. And you're about to face a federal inquiry for this." Daniels's face paled, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Carter stammered, "Sir, we didn't know." "You didn't ask," James snapped, his eyes blazing. "You saw a black man in a nice car and assumed the worst. You're done here." He turned to Malik, his expression softening for a moment. "You okay, son?" Malik nodded, his jaw tight. "I'm fine, but this isn't." He gestured to the room, to the officers, to the system that had brought him here. "This happens every day, and it's time it stops." James's eyes darkened, a silent agreement passing between them. "We'll handle it," he said. "Together." Malik sat at his desk in the Justice Department, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows across the stacks of files before him. It had been a week since the traffic stop, and the memory still burned. Daniels's sneer, Carter's rough hands, the cuffs biting into his wrists. But it wasn't just his own humiliation that kept him awake at night. It was the countless others, the ones without a father in high places, the ones who didn't make it out of that precinct with their dignity intact. He'd always known the system was broken. Growing up, he'd heard the stories, his father's rise from a public defender to attorney general, fighting against a tide of bias. Malik had followed in his footsteps, driven by a fire to fix what his father couldn't. Law school at Howard, clerkships, a job at the Justice Department. He'd built his life around justice, not just for himself, but for those who had no voice. But now, after that night, it was personal. His phone buzzed, a text from his father. "Meet me at the precinct. 2 p.m. Bring the files." Malik's jaw tightened. He'd spent days digging, pulling records, cross-referencing incident reports. What he'd found was a pattern, hundreds of stops like his, targeting black and brown drivers with flimsy pretexts and no convictions. Daniels and Carter weren't outliers, they were symptoms of a department rotten to its core. Malik had drafted a complaint, a bold one, naming the entire precinct in a civil rights lawsuit. It was audacious, maybe reckless, but he'd seen the faces in those reports. Mothers, students, workers, all treated like criminals. He couldn't look away. At the precinct, the air was thick with tension. Malik walked in beside his father, his suit pressed, his briefcase heavy with evidence. The officers at the front desk froze, their eyes darting between Malik and James. Whispers followed them down the hall, the weight of the Attorney General's presence like a storm cloud. In the meeting room, the precinct chief, a grizzled man named Hargrove, sat with Daniels and Carter, their faces a mix of defiance and fear. "Mr. Thompson," Hargrove began, his voice gruff. "We apologize for the misunderstanding. It was a routine stop." "Routine," Malik cut in, his voice sharp but controlled. He slid a folder across the table, pages spilling out, dashcam footage logs, arrest reports, witness statements. "This isn't routine, it's systemic. Your officers target black drivers at 5 times the rate of white drivers. No drugs, no weapons, just assumptions. You did it to me. You do it every day." Daniels leaned forward, his face red. "You were driving a car that didn't match your profile. We had reason." "Reason," Malik's voice rose, his calm cracking. "I was driving home from work, in a suit, with a law degree. What's my profile, officer? Black?" The room went silent, the word hanging heavy. James's hand rested on Malik's shoulder, a steadying force, but Malik didn't need it. He was done being polite. Hargrove cleared his throat. "We'll investigate internally, if there's an issue." "There's an issue," James said, his voice low, dangerous. "And it's not just your officers, it's your policies, your training, your culture. My son was working a sting operation for the Justice Department, and you treated him like a criminal. What do you do to people who can't call me?" The officers shifted, uncomfortable. Malik opened his briefcase, pulling out a draft complaint. "This is a federal lawsuit," he said, "against your department, for systemic racism, civil rights violations, and abuse of power. I'm filing it tomorrow unless you agree to an independent audit and immediate reforms." Hargrove's eyes widened. "You can't sue an entire department. That's—" "Watch me," Malik said, his voice steady now, a fire burning in his chest. He'd spent years preparing for moments like this, honing his mind, his arguments. He wasn't just a victim. He was a weapon, forged in the crucible of injustice. That night, Malik sat in his apartment, the city humming outside his window. He'd filed the lawsuit, the news already spreading. headlines screaming about the Attorney General's son taking on a corrupt precinct. But the victory felt hollow. He thought of the others, the ones who'd never get a headline, the ones whose names were buried in reports. His phone buzzed with messages, support from colleagues, threats from strangers, calls from reporters. He ignored them all, his eyes on a photo on his desk. Him and his father, years ago at a community center opening. James had taught him that justice wasn't given. It was fought for. The next day, the precinct pushed back. Hargrove held a press conference flanked by Daniels and Carter, claiming the lawsuit was baseless and politically motivated. They painted Malik as a spoiled kid riding his father's coattails, a narrative that stung more than he'd expected. Social media erupted, some calling him a hero, others a traitor. The pressure was suffocating, but Malik didn't bend. He met with activists, gathered more testimony, built his case brick by brick. Every late night, every hostile stare from an officer, every whispered threat, it fueled him. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. At a community meeting, he stood before a crowd of families, many of whom had faced the same harassment he had. An older woman, her hands trembling, told him about her son, stopped and beaten, his record ruined. A teenager spoke of being profiled, his dreams of college derailed. Malik listened, his heart heavy but his resolve ironclad. "This isn't just my fight," he told them, "it's ours, and we're going to win." The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Malik stood at the plaintiff's table, his suit crisp, his eyes locked on the judge. Months had passed since the traffic stop, months of depositions, motions, and media storms. The lawsuit had grown, ballooning into a class action case representing hundreds of victims of the precinct's practices. Malik had led the charge, his father's support unwavering but his own skill carrying the day. He'd argued every motion, cross-examined every witness, his voice steady, his arguments razor-sharp. The defense, backed by the city, had fought dirty, leaking stories, digging into Malik's past, even questioning his credentials. But Malik was relentless, his case built on ironclad evidence, dashcam footage, statistical analyses, sworn statements from former officers who'd turned whistleblower. The precinct's culture of profiling was laid bare, its policies dissected, its officers' actions exposed. Now, the judge's gavel hung in the balance. Malik glanced at the gallery, where his father sat, his face a mix of pride and tension. Beside him were the families, the activists, the people who'd trusted Malik to carry their pain into this room. He felt their weight, their hope, their anger. This is it, he thought. This is why. The judge cleared her throat, her voice cutting through the silence. In the case of Thompson vs. City Police Department, this court finds the defendants liable for systemic violations of civil rights under the 4th and 14th Amendments. A murmur rippled through the room, growing to a roar as she continued. The department is ordered to undergo an independent audit, implement mandatory training, and pay damages to the plaintiffs. This is a landmark ruling, Mr. Thompson. You've set a precedent. The gallery erupted, cheers and sobs mingling. Malik stood still, his heart pounding, a weight lifting from his shoulders. He'd done it, not just for himself, but for the woman whose son was beaten, the teenager whose dreams were stolen, the countless others whose stories would now be heard. His father approached, his hand heavy on Malik's shoulder. "I'm proud of you," James said, his voice thick. "You didn't just win a case. You changed the game." Malik nodded, his eyes on the families in the gallery, their faces alight with something he hadn't seen before. Hope. He thought of that night on the highway, the cuffs, the sneers, the fear. It had been a spark, igniting a fire that burned through the system's lies. He wasn't just the Attorney General's son anymore. He was Malik Thompson, the lawyer who'd taken on a department and won. As he left the courtroom, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. Malik didn't flinch. He looked straight ahead, his voice steady as he spoke. This isn't the end. It's the beginning. We're coming for every system that thinks it can break us." The crowd roared again, and Malik felt it. A surge of justice, hard-won and bittersweet but undeniable. He'd turned his pain into power, and the world would never be the same.